afterwards decided to call recordings in progress. And soon after decided to call the beautiful state of Alaska her home. She earned her master's degree in resource and applied economics from the University of Alaska, where she is an adjunct instructor in economics and is currently a doctoral student focusing on water security issues. Ms. Johnson has over 5 years of experience working on a variety of projects in rural Alaska. We're all very excited to be able to hear from her today. So Barbara, the mic is yours and take it away.
Perfect. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for coming and thank you so much for having me in this space. We really appreciate the opportunity. I'm here as the environmental coordinator for the Native Village of Georgetown. I just started this position in May, so I'm actually very much a baby environmental coordinator, and I'm really lucky to get to share about the work that's been done by my predecessors and the community on water monitoring in the, I'm just going to admit Mari so that we might have a few pop-ups on my screen. I apologize. And I'm extremely happy to be able to share some of the work that Georgetown has been doing for over a decade now on water monitoring on the Kuskokwim. As was mentioned, I grew up in Italy and I still talk with my hands. I know that sometimes people can find it distracting. But yeah, that's just who I am. Let me know if I'm speaking too fast. I also do that sometimes. I won't be offended. Just speak up and I'll slow down a bit. I wanted to give a bit of an introduction about Georgetown because I know there's several people on the line who are maybe not familiar with the Kuskokwim region. And so the Native Village of Georgetown, the village of Georgetown sits at the confluence of the George River and the Kuskokwim River. Right over here in between two mines, Red Devil and Donlin Gold, and I'm mentioning this, I'll come back to this. Georgetown is about 200 river miles upriver from Akiak, where I know a lot of you are working. Bethel is just here. Georgetown is also 260 miles away from Anchorage, where I'm calling in from right now, the Nina land. And so Georgetown is off the road system. The closest place to get gas is in Red Devil, close to Red Devil Mine. It's $7 per gallon. A round trip ticket to Anchorage is $1,000. There's a family that lives in Georgetown full time, and then the rest of our tribal members live in about 20 communities throughout the Kuskokwim region, in the Anchorage area, and also in the lower 48. Until 1909, Georgetown was used as a seasonal settlement primarily for fishing. And then in 1909, gold was discovered in the area along the George River, and it became a permanent settlement. The name Georgetown comes from there were three traders at the time, George Morgan, George Fredericks, and George Hoffman. And so they gave their name to the place. Several of our tribal members are actually directly descendants from these Georges, and so there's a direct connection. From 1909 to 1911, the population of Georgetown increased to approximately 700 people, and then in 1911, there was a huge fire that destroyed over 200 log cabins. There were only 25 log cabins remaining, and after that, the population continued to decrease until 1917, when the state school closed. With the closure of the state school, one family remained, and the few families that had still been there moved to other communities in the region. My tribal members continue to return to Georgetown. It's a really important place for people. These are pictures I took from a trip just this summer, actually. Several families return regularly for fishing, specifically in the summer, and then also for hunting and gathering. It's really important and central to the mission of Georgetown. These pictures are taken from what we call Old Georgetown on the other side of the river. And opposite Georgetown is where we're hoping to build a new village. We currently have a community center there that was built about 5 years ago. With this in mind, the Native Village of Georgetown became a federally recognized tribe in 1998. And that was a very important moment because it allowed the tribe to have access to federal funding. The purpose of the Georgetown Tribal Council, and I'm just going to pull this up a second because I think it's really a great mission statement. The purpose of the Georgetown Tribal Council is to ensure the best quality of life for all Native people of the region now and for future generations. And this has always been centered around the Kuskokwim River. This is our logo here, and that actually represents the Cusco and the fish in it. And so it really gives you an idea of how important all of this is. About 10 years after Georgetown became a federally recognized tribe, the environmental department was created through the IGAP program, the Indian General Assistance Program of the EPA. And the mission of the environmental department is to protect the health of the Kuskokwim and George rivers. That is the sole mission. That is, every work that we do is related to that. And the Georgetown Tribal Council believes that everyone is entrusted with the preservation of the environment, and the aim is that future generations can benefit from it. With this in mind, around the same time that the environmental department was created, the Donlin gold mine, a gold mine that's about 13 miles downriver, was proposed. In addition, there was becoming increasing awareness about the impacts of Red Devil Mine. This is a cinnabar mercury mine that closed in 1971. It's upriver, and Georgetown is, if you remember the map, is right in between the two. The Red Devil Mine actually closed before any environmental regulations were in place, and so there was no requirement for there to be a cleanup. And so this has really impacted the region and also impacted the perception of water quality. In 2006, they started exploring the possibility of developing Donlin Gold Mine, which is an open pit mine just downriver from Georgetown. And then at the same time, residents also started reporting a lot more changes in the region. On the right, this figure here is taken from a report called Adapting the Middle Kuskokwim Adaptation Plan, which was a collaboration between Georgetown and other Middle Kuskokwim communities. To determine what are some of the changes and try and start with the goal of adapting to these changes. And so putting all of this together, tribal members started really being interested in the water, in the health of the watershed and water quality, and asked that we start working on that. And so what happened is Georgetown started a water monitoring program. It's been solely funded through the IGAP, Indian General Assistance Program of the EPA. We're extremely grateful for this funding. When we started it back in 2006, 2007, started working on a QAP, a Quality Assurance Project Plan. The idea of the water monitoring program was to monitor the health of the river and to establish a baseline and to make this baseline relevant and valid. And so that was why it was really important to get a Quality Assurance Project Plan. At the time and throughout this project, we've also had a lot of questions, and we're really grateful and just wanted to give a shout out. And this list is in no way exhaustive, but the Yukon River and the Tribal Watershed Council has been really, really supportive and generous with their time and helped us actually put together original QAP. The EPA has been helpful in more ways than one. And the Native Village of Napai mute some of our neighbors, and I'm also going to mention them later. And we're regularly in contact with all these entities throughout. Another thing that we've also worked on is that with the interest of helping establish this baseline, every environmental coordinator, and everyone in my position is always trained as a qualified environmental sampler training. We found this training is really helpful and helps ensure that we have the skills to do the monitoring. At the time that the water monitoring program was started, there was an interest in assessing whether what resources could be available for drinking water in the new village of Georgetown. And so we have 2 monitoring wells to monitor groundwater in the new Georgetown. And then we also started assessing surface water. So this is a picture of the Kuskokwim from the new Georgetown site. And then these are pictures of coolers that we use to take back samples. This picture here is a picture of one of our monitoring wells. And so when we're monitoring groundwater, we need to use a pump, and we also have the YSI meter. We take some measurements in the field for surface water and groundwater, and then we also collect samples and send them to the lab. And so we used to use a YSI 556. We've now moved on to a newer model, but here's a picture of YSI 556, and it's a handheld model. And then you have a probe. Oops, sorry, I apologize. And then you have a probe, this probe here, and you just stick it into water basically, and you're able to take measurements. And so we take these in the field. We measure the pH to get an idea of how acidic or basic the water is. And the way I think of pH, I always get it confused. I'm an economist by training, as was mentioned. I think of it as basically we're trying to see if the water is too acidic or too sour, too bitter. And what we want is the water to taste neutral. According to the state of Alaska water quality standards for healthy aquatic life, the pH should be a healthy pH should be between 6.5 and 8.5, which is neutral. The other measurements that we take with the YSI are temperature. Temperature is one of the most central central parameters that we can measure. It affects toxicity of other elements. It affects dissolved oxygen. It also, fish, specifically salmon, need certain temperature ranges for their life cycle. We also measure conductivity, which is a measure of how much electricity the water can transmit. There's no actual state water quality standard related to conductivity, but it tells us if there's contaminants. So high ability to transmit electricity could mean that there's a high concentration of metals and salts. The other measurements that we take in the field are dissolved oxygen, which is the amount of oxygen available to life, basically, in the water. Higher temperatures, the higher the water temperature, the lower the availability of oxygen. In addition to the field ones that we take, we also take some samples and send them to the lab. And I'm not sure if you're able to see, I apologize, or if my control panel is blocking it. But anyways, the first measurement that we have the lab test for is hardness. And this is the amount of dissolved calcium and magnesium. We need this measurement to then determine whether the metal concentrations that we're measuring, certain of these concentration limits are based on hardness. And so basically there are two parameters we have to measure together. In terms of metals, we look at iron, mercury, copper, lead, and so on. We've also measured VOCs and SVOCs, volatile organic compounds and semi-volatile organic compounds, basically like gas. And so these are chemicals that either evaporate in the air or they settle. And my understanding is in surface water, they'll either settle into sediments or they evaporate unless they're right after spill, but in groundwater, they tend to be more present. So what Georgetown does is that twice a year, generally in June and September, we go out and we take 4 samples. So we take one at each monitoring well, one right on the Cusco River, right in front of Georgetown, and then one just at the mouth of the George River. And so we take these samples twice a year. Because the river, the Kuskokwim River is over 700 miles long, and what happens downriver affects what's happening upriver, and everything is so interconnected. It's such an incredible organism and watershed. And so for several years, we were able to partner with other communities in the regions, including Kauskag, Joashbaluk, Aniak, Napaimute, Sleepmute, Talida, and Georgetown. And what happened is that every community would take their samples independently, and then they would send them to us, and we would put them up on a GIS map. I shared a link to this GIS map at the end of the presentation. And there's some variability in when the data was taken and what months and so on, but it is really interesting to look at it. And one project that we've started to look at is, okay, now that we have all this data, what is it telling us? And so looking at the river-wide data that we have, we found looking at from 2012 to 2007 through 2017 is when we have the majority of the data. We find that the temperatures are changing, but in some places they're going up and in some places they're going down. And so it's unclear to us. There's no overall trend. So specific locations have a trend, but overall it depends on where you're looking at. Interestingly, we found that dissolved oxygen values seem to be okay. Right? There's a lot of concern about increasing temperatures, and so far we seem to be okay. But what really highlighted it, something this review really highlighted for us, is the need for more data. As I mentioned, Georgetown, we're really only collecting samples twice a year. And sometimes, I just started in May. By the time I did my training, I was only able to get on the Kuskokwim in July. And so suddenly we can't compare the sample I collected in July to the one from June from last year, because it's very different times of year. And so what we really need is more data, specifically seasonal data, to be able to look at what's happening, seasonal variations, and then also take more samples along the river to get a better idea of what's going on. I just wanted to share this quick chart. This is one of the surface water samples that we take in front of the George River. As I was mentioning, some temperatures are going up, some temperatures are going down. So as we see in front of Georgetown in July, the temperatures actually seem relatively constant, but in September, we're seeing a lot more variation, and I'm unsure why that is, and that's something we're hoping to explore more. And so looking at the data for the different sites we had, we did, when possible, we compared between months, and we did see that there was some variation in changes across the months. Now that we've been doing it for over 10 years, we're starting to take a step back and also think about some of the challenges that we face and some of the lessons learned. And that's something we really want to share. We think it's really important for the more we can share and the more we can learn from each other, the better. One of the challenges that Georgetown has faced is staff turnover. We typically have staff that changes every year. And so what that means is that, as I mentioned, I just started in May. It's going to take me a while to get, up to speed. And so with staff turnover, we have like each new staff member has to be trained. It's also sometimes we've run into problems just making sure that what has been done previously is communicated down the line and so on, and all the problems inherent to that. And that's one that we're not quite sure how to fix, but we're aware of it. The other one is funding. We're really grateful for the EPA funding. It's been extremely valuable. It's really helped us set up this program, but we are limited in what we can do. As I mentioned, we are in Anchorage, and so we fly back to the community. That involves there's some costs involved with that. It's also expensive to do the lab test. We have to take field duplicates for quality assurance purposes. And so that's just, you're replicating one sample and you have to pay for that sample to be analyzed. And you're just doing that purely for quality assurance purposes, which is really important. But lab testing can cost upwards of $5,000, which is for each, depending how many samples you have. We've also run into the problem of replacing equipment. As I mentioned, we used to use the YSI 556 and the little probe that I showed. The pH sensor is really, really sensitive, and it actually broke twice. And looking at the data, we also saw that a lot of the variation in data was in the pH because some of the pH sensors were no longer calibrating properly. We saw some pH's value of 1, which is extremely acidic, and some of 12. And those are likely unrealistic values, like we would be seeing the effects if those had been true. And so one of those challenges has been maintaining and keeping the equipment safe when we're only using it twice a year. And also being able to replace it. The YSI 556 meter that we've been using till this year, its replacement has now been discontinued, and now there's a replacement for the replacement. So it's really 2 generations discontinued. Another challenge that we face are logistics. Some of them are inherent to the fairly unique position Georgetown is, where our offices are in Anchorage and the site, is on the cusp of off the road system. But others also just getting the samples back for testing in time. Sometimes there's weather problems. It used to be that the lab we used moved to Seattle. So then suddenly that summer we were faced with getting the samples from Georgetown to Seattle within a certain time frame and making sure they stayed at the right temperature. We've now moved to a lab in Anchorage, but there's still some logistical challenges associated with that. And also just trying to collect data when we're remote. It's really hard. There's no internet connection, there's no cell connection. So a lot of the options that are available to other projects are just not available to us right now. In terms of our next steps, we're really, really excited. We've been able to purchase continuous data loggers this year. They're back ordered, but we should be receiving them in October. And so next season, we're going to be able to go out and place them for the whole summer. Most of them will measure temperature every half an hour. And then I believe we have 3 that will measure temperature and pH every half an hour. So we'll put them out there, leave them for the season, and then that should increase our data points quite a bit at minimal cost. We're also in the project of revising our QAP, this is our quality assurance project plan. One of the things we're trying to do is to make every step of the instruction much clearer. That way, the staff turnover, you can just pick up the QAP and go through it and go step by step. And we're also reevaluating some of the parameters that we are using. It's been over 10 years now. And so we're going to sit down actually at the next environmental committee meeting and be like, okay, are these still our priorities? Is this still what we're trying to do? And for us, what's really important also is working with others. We cannot collect this, like the more of us working on this, the more we're collaborating, the better the quality of the monitoring is. And so we're also looking to learn from other people. There's some fairly unique circumstances we're all facing working in the Kuskokwim, and any advice is appreciated. Finally, I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to a few other organizations doing work on the Kuskokwim. The native village of Napaidnut has been collecting water temperature data throughout the Kuskokwim for several years now. They're also working in collaboration with some researchers on a project that is called Mapping the Spatial and Temporal Thermal Trends of the Kuskokwim and Aniak Rivers. And I apologize if I'm butchering the summary. blame me, but my understanding is they're using satellite imagery to try and determine the surface water temperatures and also to determine places that are beneficial to fisheries. And so it's a really exciting project. And the idea is that this could be a really cost-effective way of monitoring some of the parameters and doing so remotely. Another really cool program that Napai has is in collaboration with the Cuspec School District. They run youth camps. One of them is the George River Internship and the Math Science Expedition. These are free for participants, high school participants who learn water quality and fish monitoring techniques and what could actually be hired as fish techs by the time they graduate. I was really lucky to get to join the GRI this summer. And one really cool thing is that the GRI has been collecting water quality data of the George River. So it's a tributary of the Kuskokwim right in front of Georgetown for 6 years now. And so that data source is really invaluable. I also wanted to highlight ONC down in Bethel. Their website page is currently being reworked, but their Facebook page is a quite good source of information. They've been doing a lot of fish monitoring work, which is directly related, to water monitoring. There's also the Kuskokwim River Intertribal Fish Commission, does great work, especially in the summer, keeping us all informed of what's going on. And the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council, as I mentioned, they've been really generous with that time and just sharing information. They help with the Indigenous Observation Network on the Yukon, so they have a lot of experience with remote and rural sensing and water quality monitoring. They also very often run free training classes, sampling classes. And finally, I just wanted to share some of my information. We use Facebook quite a bit to stay in touch, so feel free to please follow us on Facebook. My email address or the general email address for Georgetown are great places to contact us. And we also have the Georgetown website, georgetowntc.com. And the environmental department runs a blog, georgetowntc.wordpress.com. Sorry, I'm seeing there's a typo there, georgetowntc.wordpress.com. And we update regularly about our findings about water quality monitoring and the other environmental work we do in the Kuskokwim. And that's all I had.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Let me go ahead and stop our recording so that we can move into the next segment of this, which is the discussion, talking circle, including comments,